My mother-in-law's prank cost me my job. Everyone laughed, said I was too sensitive. Months later I moved overseas, quiet but thriving. Suddenly messages poured in, "We're so proud, need a small favor." I told them to check their inboxes. One by one their smiles faded. No one's laughing now. "She's choking. Someone help her." Ella's voice pierced through the Saturday brunch chatter, silencing the restaurant instantly. Grace clutched at her throat, face reddening as she pushed away her half-eaten chocolate mousse. Her eyes, wide with panic, locked with mine across the dining room. But something wasn't right. For just a split second I caught it, the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. A smirk. "My friend has a severe nut allergy." Ellen shrieked, phone already recording as diners turned in horror. "Who's responsible for this?" All eyes swung to me. Amber Mitchell, food and beverage manager of Savory Ridge Restaurant. In that terrible moment I knew exactly what was happening, but it was already too late. The damage was calculated, precise, and aimed directly at everything I'd built over the past 5 years. My mother-in-law had finally found the perfect weapon. Before that catastrophic Saturday, my life ran with the same precision as the restaurant I managed. I arrived each morning at 6:30 a.m. sharp, relishing the quiet half-hour before the prep cooks arrived. The dining room, still and peaceful with chairs neatly tucked under crisp white tablecloths, felt more like home than the small house I shared with Scott just 10 minutes from his parents' place. Those early mornings were sacred, checking inventory sheets against actual stock, adjusting orders for weekend rushes, troubleshooting delivery issues before they became crises. By the time Chef Daniel arrived, I'd already identified potential problems and found solutions. "Amber sees around corners," he often told the staff. "Nothing gets past her." That reputation for competence hadn't come easily. I'd started as a nervous hostess 6 years earlier, working weekend shifts while taking night classes in restaurant management at the local community college. 4 promotions later, I'd transformed into someone the owner trusted implicitly with everything from staff training to health inspections. I'd implemented a digital inventory system that cut waste by 22% and memorized every regular customer's preferences and potential allergens, especially allergies. We'd never had an incident under my watch. The community college culinary program was where Scott and I met. He had warm eyes and easy charm, dreaming aloud about the bistro he'd own someday. 3 months after graduation, we married in a small ceremony that left both our families somewhat stunned. His thought I wasn't quite polished enough. Mine worried I was rushing into marriage to escape my father's constant criticism and my mother's enabling silence. They weren't entirely wrong. Scott represented stability and promise, a culinary school graduate with a supportive, well-connected family. What I didn't anticipate was that supportive came with expectations, particularly from Grace, my mother-in-law. Grace Mitchell presided over her corner of suburban life like a benevolent dictator. Her home was magazine perfect, her charity work strategic, her opinions delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd raised 3 children who all married appropriate partners, except Scott. During our first meeting, she'd examined me before asking, "And what does your father do, dear?" When I explained he was a maintenance worker at the local factory, something flickered behind her smile that never quite disappeared. The comments began subtly. "Restaurant work has such challenging hours. Scott must get so lonely," she'd say during Sunday dinners, always mandatory at her house. Or, "My friend's daughter just became a pharmaceutical rep. The benefits are wonderful, and they start families earlier." When I was promoted to manager, she tilted her head sympathetically and said, "That's nice, dear. I suppose every job has a ceiling." Scott never seemed to notice these digs, or chose not to. "Mom's just old-fashioned," he'd say on our drives home from her house. "She means well." As months became years, the small house we'd bought temporarily, near his parents, remained our permanent residence, and Grace's unannounced visits became increasingly frequent. The restaurant was my sanctuary, the one place where my competence wasn't questioned. I knew every aspect of its operation, which suppliers might deliver late, which servers couldn't handle the patio section alone, how to soothe an irate customer while simultaneously signaling the bartender to comp a round of drinks. The small gold nameplate on my blazer, "Amber Mitchell F&B Manager," was my shield against Grace's subtle undermining. Jamie, our tattooed head bartender with an unused psychology degree, was the only person who fully understood the situation. She noticed the tension in my shoulders whenever Grace made her surprise visits to the restaurant, always arriving just as we hit our busiest period. Your mother-in-law asked if I knew of any more appropriate positions for you while you were in the kitchen yesterday, Jamie told me one night as we closed up. Like managing this place was some kind of stepping stone to what? Becoming her clone. She's just traditional, I said, focusing intently on reconciling the day's receipts. She's a nightmare in designer clothes, Jamie countered, never one to mince words. And Scott needs to grow a spine. Last week when she criticized your wine suggestion, he actually apologized to her. For your recommendation. That was spot on, by the way. I couldn't argue. My marriage had developed hairline fractures, disagreements about family obligations, tense silences after visits with Grace, Scott's subtle resentment of my work schedule, and my frustration with his unwillingness to establish boundaries with his mother. Still, in quiet moments away from his family's influence, I caught glimpses of the man I'd fallen in love with, supportive, kind, and proud of my accomplishments. Then came the phone call that should have warned me something was wrong. Grace had called Scott directly, not me, to announce she was bringing her friends Ella and Ellen to Savory Ridge for Saturday brunch, our busiest service. Tell Amber to reserve us the best table, she'd instructed him. The girls are so looking forward to seeing her in her element. The way she emphasized element, like I was a zoo animal rather than a professional manager, made my stomach clench. But I smiled and nodded when Scott relayed the message, already rehearsing the polite professional persona I would present. You know they're coming to criticize, not support, Jamie warned when I mentioned the impending visit while reviewing liquor orders. They're just Scott's mom and her church friends, I said, trying to convince myself. They've been here before. It'll be fine. That Saturday morning I'd taken extra care with everything. I personally checked each reservation, confirmed the kitchen was fully stocked, and briefed the staff about potential VIPs visiting, not just Grace's table. When they arrived promptly at 11:30, I greeted them with professional warmth, escorting them to our best corner table by the window. Amber, darling, you look tired, Grace said, air-kissing my cheek. These hours must be so draining. Ella and Ellen exchanged knowing looks as they settled into their seats. The next hour unfolded like a carefully choreographed attack. Nothing was quite right for them. The table was drafty, the coffee not hot enough, the menu options surprisingly limited. Grace questioned each server who approached, asking about ingredients and preparation methods as though conducting a health inspection. I maintained my professional demeanor, stepping in when necessary to smooth ruffled feathers. Mom, give them a break, Scott said once, having joined the table after my text asking for backup. But he quickly fell silent when Grace patted his hand dismissively. When dessert arrived, the chocolate mousse Grace had specifically requested despite it being clearly labeled on our menu as containing hazelnut, I felt a momentary relief. They were nearly finished. I could survive another 15 minutes. Then came the scream. As waitstaff rushed to help and diners watched in horror, I stood paralyzed. Not because I was afraid or uncertain, but because in that terrible moment of chaos I caught Grace's eyes again. They held none of the panic of an allergic reaction. Instead, I saw something far worse. Satisfaction. That's when I knew. This was no accident. This was execution day. And I had been set up for the fall. The restaurant erupted into chaos. A customer with medical training rushed forward while another called 911. Waitstaff scrambled for the emergency kit we kept behind the bar. And there was Grace, her performance worthy of a Golden Globe, wheezing dramatically as Ellen filmed everything on her phone and Ella shouted accusations about negligence and lawsuits. Check the menu. I finally managed to say, my voice tight with barely controlled panic. The chocolate mousse clearly lists hazelnut as an ingredient. Mrs. Mitchell specifically requested it after I personally warned her about the nuts. Marcus, the restaurant owner who'd been enjoying a rare Saturday off until getting the frantic call from our host, appeared at my side, his face ashen. Amber, what happened? He whispered. Before I could explain, Grace's miraculous recovery began. Her breathing steadied as the paramedics entered. They immediately began assessment procedures while she waved them off, voice suddenly stronger. I think I'm all right now, she said weakly, though her eyes remained clear and calculating. It must not have been a full reaction. I'm just so careful usually. The head paramedic frowned. Ma'am, with nut allergies, there's no such thing as a partial reaction. We need to administer epinephrine and get you to the hospital immediately. Grace exchanged a quick glance with Ella. Oh, I don't think that's necessary. I'm feeling much better. Perhaps it wasn't the nuts after all. We should still transport you, the paramedic insisted. Anaphylaxis can have delayed secondary reactions. I know my own body, Grace said firmly, her weak patient act slipping. I've decided against medical transport. That's my right. The paramedics looked skeptical but couldn't force treatment. They had Grace sign a waiver declining medical transportation, a document I would later request a copy of through official channels. As they packed up, Marcus guided me into his office, shutting the door on the murmuring restaurant. What just happened out there? His voice was controlled but cold. Marcus, she's my mother-in-law. She knows exactly what's in our desserts. I personally reviewed the menu with her when they arrived. She has never once mentioned a nut allergy in the 5 years I've known her. The entire dining room just witnessed a woman nearly die from something our restaurant served, he said, cutting me off. Whether it was a misunderstanding or miscommunication doesn't matter. The perception is what counts. But... No buts, Amber. I've got paramedics out there, customers who've abandoned their meals, and a social media disaster brewing. Alan is still filming everything. My stomach dropped. You don't believe me. What I believe doesn't matter. We need to contain this situation. He rubbed his temples. Where's Scott? Shouldn't he be here supporting you? The question stung more than he could know. Scott had indeed disappeared from his mother's table during the commotion. I'd spotted him standing frozen by the kitchen doors, watching the scene unfold without approaching. When our eyes met across the room, he'd looked away first. He's around, I said lamely. Marcus grimaced. Go home, Amber. Take the rest of the weekend. We'll discuss this Monday morning. When I emerged from his office, the dining room had mostly emptied except for a few lingering customers and staff whispering among themselves. Scott stood awkwardly beside his mother's table where Grace, Ella, and Ellen sat huddled together, examining Ellen's phone footage. And when we slow it down here, Ellen was saying, you can actually see her face when she realizes what's happening. Not a hint of concern. Just annoyance. They fell silent as I approached. Grace dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a napkin. Amber, darling, I'm so sorry about all this unpleasantness, she said with practiced sincerity. Who could have known that tiny bit of hazelnut would cause such trouble? You did, I said quietly. Because there was never any allergic reaction. Scott's head jerked up. Amber. Mom could have died. Could she, Scott? Then why did she refuse transport to the hospital? Why is she sitting here completely fine after supposedly ingesting her allergen? Where's the epinephrine auto-injector she should carry if her allergy is so severe? Grace placed a restraining hand on Scott's arm as he opened his mouth to argue. She's upset, honey. Let's not make this worse. Clearly, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said, voice shaking, is that I thought you had basic human decency. What kind of person fakes an allergic reaction? Amber. Scott looked horrified. Apologize to my mother right now. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Jamie stood nearby, watching with undisguised concern. Other staff members averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding. No, I said, surprising even myself. I will not apologize for telling the truth. Grace doesn't have a nut allergy. She ordered that dessert deliberately, knowing exactly what was in it. Ellen filmed everything because they planned this. Grace's expression hardened for just an instant before her face crumpled into a hurt, maternal mask. Scott, I can't believe this. After everything we've been through today. Let's just go, Scott muttered, helping his mother to her feet. We'll talk about this at home, Amber. Oh, she shouldn't come home yet, Grace said smoothly. She needs time to calm down. We'll take you to our house for dinner. I stood rooted to the spot as they gathered their things. Ella made a show of leaving cash for the bill, far less than what they actually owed, while Ellen tucked her phone away with a satisfied smirk. This isn't over, I said quietly as Grace brushed past me. She paused, leaning close so only I could hear. You're right about that, dear. When it comes to my son's well-being, A mother does what's necessary. Perhaps now you'll reconsider your priorities. Then she was gone, Scott trailing in her wake without a backward glance at me or the devastation they'd left behind. Jamie appeared at my side, slipping a supportive arm around my shoulders. I heard everything, she whispered. I can back you up with Marcus. But looking around at the wreckage of my professional reputation, staff avoiding my eyes, customers whispering behind menus, Marcus emerging from his office with a grimly determined expression, I knew it wouldn't matter. Grace had calculated every aspect of her performance, from the timing during our busiest service to the strategic filming that would undoubtedly make its way onto social media. She planned this, I said numbly. She came here specifically to destroy me. But why? Jamie asked. What could she possibly gain? The answer crystallized with terrible clarity. Grace had never accepted me as part of her family. My career, my independence, my influence over Scott, all threatened her control. And like a chess master, she'd found the perfect move to eliminate me from the board. Control, I whispered. This was never about allergies or desserts or restaurant negligence. It was about forcing me to choose between my career and my marriage. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Scott. Mom says I should stay with them tonight. Give you space to think about your behavior. In that moment, standing amid the ruins of everything I'd built, I realized Grace had miscalculated one crucial detail. She thought this joke would break me, force me to apologize, and ultimately surrender to her vision of what a proper daughter-in-law should be. Instead, with each passing minute, something new was hardening inside me. Something cold, patient, and absolutely determined. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of hers. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I'd spent the weekend alone in our empty house, my calls to Scott going straight to voicemail. Sleep had evaded me, replaced by endless mental replays of Grace's performance and the staff's faces as I'd left the restaurant. At precisely 9 a.m. I walked into Savory Ridge, spine rigid with determined dignity. Marcus was waiting in his office with Diane from HR, her presence confirming what I already knew. The restaurant wouldn't open for another 2 hours, but I could see kitchen staff peering through the pass-through window, their expressions a mixture of pity and discomfort. Please sit down, Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk, not quite meeting my eyes. I'd rather stand, I said quietly. Diane cleared her throat. Amber, we've reviewed Saturday's incident and consulted with legal. Given the circumstances. You're firing me, I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. Despite 5 years of perfect service and spotless health inspection records. Marcus finally looked at me. It's not that simple. It actually is, I countered. Grace Mitchell faked an allergic reaction. She refused medical transport because she knew a hospital assessment would reveal she was lying. But none of that matters because the perception is already out there. The video has over 5,000 views, Diane confirmed grimly. Ellen Williams tagged local restaurant groups. Several regular customers have already canceled their standing reservations. My stomach twisted. So I'm the sacrificial lamb. We're terminating your employment effective immediately, Marcus said, sliding a folder across his desk. There's 2 months severance, a neutral reference letter, and an NDA precluding you from discussing the specifics of this incident. You want me to stay silent about being set up? The injustice hit me like a physical blow. We want to put this behind us, Diane corrected. Legal advises that countering Mrs. Mitchell's claims would only prolong the damage to the restaurant's reputation. I looked between them, these people I'd worked alongside for years. Did either of you even question why a woman with a supposedly severe nut allergy would order a dessert clearly marked as containing nuts? Or why she suddenly recovered without treatment? Their uncomfortable silence was answer enough. Your personal key card has been deactivated, Marcus said after a moment. We'll need your office keys and passcodes before you leave. I placed my keys on his desk with deliberate calm, then pulled the name badge from my blazer. 5 years of dedication reduced to a small pile of metal and plastic. For what it's worth, Marcus added as I turned to leave, I'm sorry it ended this way. Too little too late. Jamie was waiting outside, her bartending shift not starting for hours. She wrapped me in a fierce hug. This is wrong, she whispered. Everyone knows it's wrong. But no one's saying anything, I replied numbly. She pulled back, eyes flashing. I've got something to say. I'm putting in my notice today. Don't, I stopped her. You need this job. And I need someone on the inside who can tell me what really happens after I'm gone. The drive home felt surreal, the familiar streets suddenly alien. I'd built my entire adult life around that restaurant, my identity wrapped in professional competence that had been stripped away in a single weekend. My phone pinged with a text from Scott. Coming home now. We need to talk. I pulled into our driveway just as Scott's car arrived. He emerged looking tired and conflicted, his expression cautious as he approached. So, I asked before he could speak. How was your weekend at Mommy's house? He winced. Amber, don't start. This whole situation is difficult enough. Difficult? I echoed in disbelief. Your mother deliberately sabotaged my career, and you disappeared to her house instead of supporting me. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it. Scott ran a hand through his hair. Look, I talked with Mom about what happened. She admits things got out of hand, but she never intended for you to lose your job. The casual dismissal of my professional destruction made my hands shake. What exactly did she intend, Scott? She says it was supposed to be a harmless prank. To show you that maybe being so career-focused isn't the best approach for our marriage. The revelation struck me silent. In Scott's world, this justification actually made sense. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise, he continued as we entered the house. Mom always said you work too much. Now we can focus on our marriage, maybe think about starting a family. I stared at my husband, this stranger who could witness my deliberate humiliation and somehow frame it as an opportunity. Your mother faked anaphylactic shock to teach me a lesson about prioritizing family. When you put it like that. How else should I put it? My voice rose despite my efforts to maintain control. I just lost my career because your mother decided I work too much. And you're suggesting I should be grateful? Scott's expression hardened. You're being dramatic. It was a joke that went too far, but Mom feels terrible. She's even offering to help you find something more suitable. The following weeks blurred together in a haze of rejection. I applied to every restaurant, hotel, and catering company within 50 miles. Each time my references checked out perfectly, until they didn't. Somehow, inquiries would be made about the allergy incident. Interviews suddenly canceled. Positions mysteriously filled. Grace's connections in the local hospitality scene ran deeper than I'd realized. You need to come to dinner tonight, Scott insisted 3 weeks after my termination. Mom's invited everyone. She wants to make things right. I'd been avoiding family gatherings, spending my days combing job listings and my evenings drinking wine alone while Scott worked late shifts at his restaurant. The thought of facing Grace made my stomach churn. But refusing would only reinforce their narrative of me as difficult and dramatic. Grace's dining room was filled with Scott's extended family when we arrived. Conversation quieted as I entered, curious eyes evaluating my appearance, judging whether unemployment had broken me yet. Amber, darling. Grace embraced me with practiced warmth. We've missed you at Sunday dinners. Come sit by me. The meal proceeded with excruciating politeness. Mundane conversation flowing around me like water around a stone. Finally, as dessert was served, Grace clinked her glass for attention. I'd like to say something, she announced. Amber, I want to apologize publicly for the unfortunate misunderstanding at your restaurant. I never intended things to go so far. Murmurs of approval circulated the table. Scott squeezed my hand encouragingly. In fact, Grace continued, I have a proposition. The church fundraising committee needs help organizing our monthly bake sales. It's only a few hours a week, perfect for someone with your temporary flexibility. The table erupted in supportive comments. How thoughtful. What a perfect solution. Grace always finds a way to help. I remained silent, fork motionless above my untouched pie. Well, Grace prompted, her smile tightening. Isn't that a lovely opportunity? Every eye fixed on me, waiting for appropriate gratitude. Thank you for the offer, I finally said, each word precision carved from ice. I'll consider it. Grace's smile faltered at my lack of enthusiasm, but she recovered quickly. Of course, dear. Take all the time you need. It's not as though you have competing obligations. The table tittered with laughter. Later that night, unable to sleep beside Scott's gently snoring form, I went downstairs to check email on our shared laptop. Another rejection waited in my inbox, the fourth that week. As I closed the message, I noticed Scott had left his email open in another tab. Without conscious decision, I clicked on it and froze. There, in an ongoing thread with Grace titled, "Amber's Job Hunt," was evidence of betrayal so profound it stole my breath. Scott had been forwarding my job rejection emails to his mother. Their exchanges mocked my growing desperation. "Another one today." She cried for an hour. "Maybe now she'll consider Mom's church offer." Grace's response, "Patience, dear. She's still being stubborn. Once she accepts this isn't just a little setback, she'll come around." Scott, "I don't know how much longer I can take the drama. It was just a joke. She acts like her life is over." With trembling fingers, I scrolled through weeks of private humiliation made public entertainment. Every tear I'd shed, every moment of vulnerability with my husband, had been fodder for Grace's amusement and Scott's betrayal. Something vital snapped inside me that night. Not my spirit, something else entirely. The last fragile threads of love, trust, and belonging that had kept me tethered to this family. I closed the laptop, suddenly calm in a way I hadn't been since that Saturday at the restaurant. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not tomorrow, not next week, but right now, while the clarity of true, complete abandonment still sang in my blood. They thought I was alone in the rubble of my former life. They were wrong. I was the rubble. And I was about to become an avalanche. I worked quickly and methodically in the dark hours of morning, packing only what mattered: 2 suitcases of clothes, my professional certificates carefully tucked into a folder, and the external hard drive where I'd just saved screenshots of Scott and Grace's email thread. The rest, the wedding photos, the accumulated trinkets of our marriage, the life I'd built around Scott's family, could stay behind in this house that had never truly felt like mine. 3 weeks earlier, after that first rejection letter, I'd sent a carefully worded email to Daniel, our former head chef who'd left Savory Ridge last year for a position at a gastropub in Edinburgh. Just testing the waters, I'd written casually asking if he knew of any management opportunities abroad. His enthusiastic response had surprised me. "Funny you should ask. We just lost our F&B manager and can't find anyone with your level of expertise." I'd pursued the conversation as a distant contingency plan, never truly believing I'd need it. Now, as I booked a one-way flight using our emergency credit card, I felt nothing but cold certainty. The note I left on the kitchen counter was brief. "Got, I need space to rebuild what your family destroyed. Don't follow me. Don't contact me. I'll reach out when I'm ready." I didn't cry at the airport, nor during the 8-hour flight across the Atlantic. Whatever tears I might have shed had crystallized into something harder, something that would sustain me through what came next. Daniel met me at Edinburgh Airport, his familiar face a relief among the sea of strangers. "Christ, Amber," he said, hugging me awkwardly. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks." "I haven't," I admitted, following him to his rusted hatchback. "Thank you for this. For everything." "Don't thank me yet," he warned as we navigated the rainy streets of Edinburgh. "The place isn't exactly Savory Ridge. It's smaller, older, and the owner's a proper Scotsman, which means he's both the most generous and most demanding boss you'll ever have." The small apartment Daniel had helped secure was above a bookshop in Stockbridge, a charming neighborhood with colorful doors and cobblestone streets. Just one bedroom with a kitchenette and a bathroom where the shower leaked, but crucially, it was mine alone, an ocean away from Grace's machinations. Malcolm Fraser, owner of the Tartan Table Gastropub, was a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper beard and an intimidating scowl that dissolved into crinkled eyes when he smiled. He looked me up and down skeptically during our first meeting. "Daniel says you're some kind of organizational wizard," he said, Scottish accent thick but warm. "We'll see about that. 2-week trial. No promises beyond that." I started the next morning, arriving an hour before the prep cooks just as I had at Savory Ridge. The kitchen was smaller, the equipment older, but the principles remained the same. I spent that first week observing, jotting notes about inefficiencies, outdated processes, and missed opportunities. The staff watched me warily, the American interloper brought in by Daniel, taking detailed notes about their work. "They think you're a spy sent to get them sacked," Fiona, the sharp-witted head server, informed me during my second week. "Might want to explain yourself before Angus puts salt in your coffee instead of sugar." That afternoon I called a brief staff meeting before the dinner service. Standing before these strangers, I felt the ghost of my former confidence stirring. "I'm not here to report on anyone or change everything overnight," I began. "I'm here because I lost everything back home and need a fresh start. But I do have ideas that could make all our lives easier if you're willing to try them." The honesty seemed to work. Tight shoulders relaxed, suspicious glances softened. "Let's hear these miraculous ideas then," challenged Angus, the dubious sous chef. I outlined simple changes first: reorganizing the storage system, adjusting prep schedules to reduce overtime, implementing a digital inventory system similar to what I'd created for Savory Ridge. Small improvements that wouldn't disrupt their workflow but would yield immediate benefits. Malcolm approved a test run of my suggestions, watching with bemused interest as I tackled the chaos of their supply closet one rainy afternoon, emerging dusty but triumphant 6 hours later with a system that would save them hours each week. "Not bad," he admitted grudgingly, which Daniel later translated as high praise. During those first exhausting weeks, I worked double shifts, learning Scottish recipes and terminology while helping with everything from inventory to table service. At night, too wired to sleep despite bone-deep fatigue, I'd open my laptop and document everything about Grace's prank in meticulous detail. Dates, conversations, witnesses. Jamie had sent security footage showing Grace's perfectly normal walk to the bathroom after her attack, along with statements from staff who'd overheard suggestive comments from Ellen about teaching Amber a lesson. I wasn't sure what I'd do with this growing dossier of evidence. All I knew was that someday when I was ready, I wanted irrefutable proof of what they'd done. 3 months into my Scottish adventure, my temporary position became permanent. 6 months in, Malcolm promoted me to senior management after my inventory system reduced their food costs by 18%. The staff, initially suspicious, now sought my advice and included me in their after-work gatherings at the corner pub. "You've landed on your feet here," Daniel observed one evening as we walked home through the misty streets after closing. "Don't think I've ever seen Malcolm trust someone so quickly." "I'm just doing what I know," I replied, though privately I recognized that I was flourishing in ways I couldn't have at Savory Ridge, constrained by Grace's interference and Scott's passive acceptance of it. Edinburgh felt like home in a way nowhere in America ever had. I loved the medieval architecture juxtaposed against modern life, the lilting accents that had initially confused me but now sounded like music, the way strangers called me love or hen with casual warmth. I changed too. My wardrobe had shifted from the conservative business attire Grace had always criticized to comfortable, colorful pieces that suited my new life. I'd cut my hair short, a practical choice for the windy city that also felt symbolically freeing. Most importantly, I'd stopped flinching at my phone when it timed with notifications. Scott had sent dozens of messages in those first weeks, shifting from confusion to anger to pleading. I'd responded only once. I meant what I said. "I'll contact you when I'm ready." Grace had tried more creative approaches, even having friends of friends reach out about, coincidentally, planning trips to Edinburgh. I blocked them all. The unexpected opportunity came 10 months into my Scottish reinvention. Malcolm called me into his small office one afternoon, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Need to talk business," he said gruffly. "Doctor says I've got to slow down." Heart's not what it was. My stomach dropped. "Malcolm, I'm so sorry." He waved away my concern. "Not dying yet, just need to step back a bit. Daniel's a brilliant chef but couldn't manage a grocery list, let alone a business." He fixed me with a steady gaze. "You on the other hand." I stared at him, not quite comprehending what he was suggesting. "I'm offering you partnership," he said bluntly. 25% now with option to increase. You've turned this place around, made it profitable in ways it hasn't been in years. The staff respects you. I trust you." "I don't know what to say," I managed, genuinely stunned. "Say yes," Malcolm shrugged. "Or don't. But decide quickly because my cardiologist is breathing down my neck about reducing stress." I said yes, of course. How could I not? From unemployable pariah to restaurant partner in less than a year, an outcome Grace could never have anticipated when she orchestrated my downfall. That night, as I signed the preliminary partnership papers at my small kitchen table, I allowed myself a moment of vindication. I hadn't just survived, I'd thrived. My phone pinged with a social media notification. The first time I'd allowed myself to post anything about my new life. A simple photo of the Edinburgh skyline at sunset with the caption, "New Beginnings." Within minutes, I received a message from Scott. "Is that where you are? Please, Amber, we need to talk." I closed the app without responding, but with a newfound sense of calm. Let him wonder. Let them all wonder. For now, I would focus on building something new, something entirely mine that couldn't be undermined by manufactured allergic reactions or family manipulations. The woman who'd left that note on Scott's kitchen counter 11 months ago had been desperate, betrayed, and broken. The woman reviewing partnership documents in Edinburgh was something altogether different, stronger, certainly, but also patient. The kind of patient that comes with absolute certainty that someday, somehow, the scales would balance. And when they did, no one would be laughing. I ignored Scott's message that night, but something told me it was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, my social media post about Edinburgh sparked a slow trickle of communication from back home. First came likes from former coworkers, then cautious comments about how well I seemed to be doing. I posted a few more carefully curated glimpses of my new life. The gastropub's stone facade with its newly painted sign listing me as partner, the view from Arthur's Seat after a morning hike, the traditional Scottish breakfast that had become my weekend ritual. Each post was strategic, revealing my success without detailing how I'd achieved it. And each one tightened the noose of curiosity around the necks of those who'd dismissed me. The next message from Scott arrived a month after the first. "Amber, please. I miss you. I've been thinking about visiting Edinburgh. We could talk in person." I showed it to Fiona during our morning coffee ritual at the cafe across from the restaurant. Her eyebrows rose over the rim of her mug. "So the husband finally realizes what he's lost, does he?" she asked, Scottish accent thickening with disapproval. "Only took him, what, a year and a fancy job title to come crawling back?" "He's not crawling," I corrected, though a small vindictive part of me wished he were. "He's curious. There's a difference. And are you planning to satisfy this curiosity?" Fiona had become my closest friend in Edinburgh, her no-nonsense approach to life helping me rebuild my self-worth brick by stubborn brick. I sipped my coffee, considering. Not yet. The timing isn't right. The timing, as it happened, became clearer 2 days later when an email from Grace appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "Family Reconciliation," but the content revealed her true intentions. "Dearest Amber, we've all been so pleased to see you flourishing in Scotland. Scott shares your lovely photos with us, and we couldn't be prouder of what you've accomplished. By happy coincidence, my church group is planning a UK trip this summer, focusing on religious history sites. Edinburgh features prominently on our itinerary. I was hoping you might recommend accommodations and dining options for 15 ladies of a certain age. Perhaps you could even arrange a special dining experience at your establishment. We'd so love to see you in your element. This could be a wonderful opportunity for healing old wounds. Time has a way of putting things in perspective, doesn't it? With love, Grace." I read it 3 times, noting the clever construction. No direct apology for destroying my career. No acknowledgement of her deliberate sabotage. Just the presumptuous expectation that I'd be grateful for the chance to serve her and her friends, again. This time on my new turf. I didn't respond. The floodgates opened after that. Scott's cousin Megan, who'd never bothered to learn my name at family gatherings, messaged about her daughter who was considering hospitality management and would benefit enormously from your mentorship. Uncle Bob, whose retirement hobby was making barely edible hot sauce in his garage, emailed about potential distribution opportunities in the UK market. Even Scott's sister Kate, who'd laughed the loudest at Grace's church bake sale offer, reached out about a potential girls' trip to Scotland. Each message carried the same undertone. You have something we want. Your success is only valuable insofar as it can benefit us. I stored each communication in a growing digital archive. Jamie continued to be my eyes and ears at Savory Ridge, sending updates whenever my name arose in conversation. "Marcus mentioned you yesterday," she wrote in one message. "Apparently their new manager can't handle the inventory system you created. They're considering hiring a consultant to decipher your spreadsheets." The delicious irony wasn't lost on me. The most revealing message came from Scott after 3 months of increasingly desperate attempts to engage me. "Mom says she's willing to forgive the way you left if you're ready to come home. We could start fresh. I miss my wife. I stared at those words on my phone screen while sitting in what was now my office at the tartan table. The sheer audacity. Grace was willing to forgive me. After everything she'd orchestrated, after the career she'd destroyed and the marriage she'd undermined, she positioned herself as the magnanimous party extending grace to the wrongdoer. That night, I began organizing what had become an extensive collection of evidence. I created digital folders, each named for a key player in my downfall: Grace, Scott, Ella, Ellen, Marcus. Inside each, I compiled every damning piece of evidence specific to their role. In Grace's folder, security footage Jamie had smuggled out showing Grace's miraculous recovery in the restaurant bathroom immediately after her allergic reaction, walking normally and checking her makeup while Ellen adjusted her camera settings. Medical records from her regular checkups confirming no history of food allergies. Screenshots of her messages to Scott about my job search humiliations. In Scott's folder, his text messages to friends describing me as dramatic and overreacting. Email exchanges with his mother planning the Sunday dinner where Grace had offered me the church position, framing it as an intervention for my unhealthy obsession with status. His casual revelation to a mutual friend that he'd always found my career ambitions a bit embarrassing, since he'd expected a more traditional wife. Ella and Ellen's folders contained their social media posts mocking my termination, private messages Jamie had screenshot from mutual acquaintances, and statements from other waitstaff who'd overheard them planning the prank before Grace's performance began. Marcus's evidence was perhaps the most damning: emails from the restaurant's lawyer advising against termination without proper investigation, which he'd ignored in his haste to contain the PR damage. I compiled it all methodically, creating backups on multiple devices. Not yet knowing exactly how I would use it, but understanding its power. Each folder represented a person who had deemed me expendable, worthy of mockery, or simply collateral damage in Grace's campaign to control her son's life. My phone chimed with yet another message from Scott. Thinking of booking a flight next month. We really need to talk in person, Amber. This time I responded, if you're coming to Edinburgh, I suggest early June. The weather is better. His reply was instantaneous. Really? That would be perfect. Mom's church group will be there then too. Of course they would. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the rain-dappled window that overlooked the cobblestone street. For a year I'd been rebuilding myself from the ground up, not just professionally but personally. I'd discovered strength I never knew I possessed, forged genuine friendships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, created a life that was authentically mine rather than a compromise designed to please others. And now, the architects of my destruction were planning to visit, expecting accommodations, recommendations, special treatment, all while framing it as an opportunity for me to be forgiven for the sin of refusing to remain their victim. What are you thinking? Malcolm asked, finding me still sitting in the darkened office hours later. You've got that look that usually precedes a major menu overhaul or inventory revolution. I smiled, feeling a calm certainty settle over me. I'm thinking it's time to prepare for some very special guests. American friends visiting? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. Not friends, I corrected quietly. Family. The kind that only remembers your existence when they need something. Malcolm's bushy eyebrows rose. The worst sort then. The very worst, I agreed, closing my laptop with a decisive click. But don't worry. I'll make sure they receive exactly what they deserve. June arrived with unusual sunshine that bathed Edinburgh in golden light. I'd spent the preceding weeks preparing for my visitors with the same meticulous attention I once devoted to inventory spreadsheets. Every detail was considered, every contingency planned for. You're sure you want to do this? Fiona asked as we shared breakfast at my apartment the morning of their arrival. You could just ignore them. Let them wander around looking for you while you take a lovely holiday somewhere else. I smiled, buttering my toast with steady hands. I've been ignoring them for over a year. That was necessary while I rebuilt my life. But now I want them to see exactly who I've become, and exactly what they threw away. Scott was scheduled to arrive first. His flight would land at noon, with Grace's church group following in the evening. I'd booked Scott into a small hotel near the tartan table. Not the most comfortable accommodation in Edinburgh, but certainly not the worst. Grace and her friends would stay at the more upscale Royal Mile Hotel, as befitted their expectations. I dressed carefully that morning. Dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, and the soft leather jacket I'd purchased with my first partner's dividend. Professional but not trying too hard. Successful but not showy. The woman I'd become, not the woman they'd expected me to remain. At precisely 2 p.m. I walked into the hotel cafe where Scott waited. His face lit up when he saw me, then faltered slightly as he registered the changes. My shorter hair, more confident stride, the absence of the nervous smile I'd always worn around his family. Amber, he stood, arms outstretched for a hug I didn't step into. Look, different. Great but different. A year will do that, I replied, sitting across from him rather than beside him. How was your flight? He launched into a detailed account of travel inconveniences, jet lag, and his first impressions of Scotland. The same self-centered monologue I'd listened to for years without realizing how little space it left for my own thoughts or experiences. I nodded politely, studying his face. He looked older, slightly heavier around the middle with new worry lines etched around his eyes. Mom's excited to see you tonight, he eventually said, reaching for my hand across the table. I moved it to my lap before he could make contact. Her group arrives at 7. I thought maybe we could all have dinner together. Catch up properly. I've arranged a private dining experience for them tomorrow evening at the tartan table, I said neutrally. Tonight doesn't work with my schedule. His face fell slightly. Right, of course. You must be busy with your job. The hesitation before job spoke volumes. He still couldn't quite comprehend that I now co-owned a thriving establishment. Partnership, I corrected mildly. And yes, running a restaurant takes considerable time and attention. Speaking of which, I should get back for the dinner service preparations. Already? But we've barely talked. I came all this way. The entitled whine in his voice was so familiar it almost made me laugh. We'll have plenty of time to talk tomorrow, I assured him, rising from my seat. I've cleared my afternoon specially. Back at the restaurant, I finalized preparations for the next day's special event. Malcolm watched with raised eyebrows as I arranged for our best private dining room to be reserved for Grace's church group. You're giving them the royal treatment? He asked skeptically. After what they did? Trust me, I said, checking the table settings one final time. It's not kindness driving this particular hospitality. That evening I sent a single message to the email addresses I'd compiled: Scott, Grace, Ellen, Ella, Marcus, and several other family members who'd participated in my humiliation. Check your inboxes at noon tomorrow for some information you might find interesting. Then I turned off my phone and slept more peacefully than I had in months. The next morning dawned clear and bright. At precisely noon, as Edinburgh's church bells chimed across the city, I hit send on the carefully prepared emails, each recipient receiving the specific folder bearing their name, containing evidence of their personal contribution to my downfall. I waited at the restaurant, reviewing the evening's special menu with our chef, when my office phone rang. Grace's name flashed on the caller ID. Hello, Grace, I answered calmly. What is the meaning of this? Her voice shook with a combination of rage and fear I'd never heard before. Recording private conversations? Stealing security footage? This is illegal. Actually, it's not, I countered smoothly. Scotland has one-party consent for recordings, and the security cameras at Savory Ridge were disclosed in your customer agreement. As for the medical records, those were provided voluntarily by your doctor's office after I explained the situation. Apparently, faking allergic reactions for personal gain is frowned upon in medical circles. You've always been vindictive, she hissed. Scott was right about you all along. Was he? Interesting that you'd say that when I have dozens of messages showing it was your idea to sabotage my career, not his. Though he was certainly an enthusiastic participant. What do you want? The question came out strangled, her customary control slipping. Money? Is that what this blackmail is about? I'm not blackmailing anyone, Grace. I'm simply sharing information. What you choose to do with that information is entirely up to you. I hung up as Scott's call came through on my cell phone. His voice was unrecognizable, choked with emotion. Amber, please. I can explain. I never meant for things to go so far. Mom was just trying to help us spend more time together. By destroying my career and publicly humiliating me? Kept my voice level. That's an interesting approach to marriage counseling. I was weak, he admitted. I should have stood up to her. But I've changed. I miss you. We can start over. That's not possible, Scott. I've filed for divorce. The papers are in your second email attachment, below the screenshots of you mocking my job search with your mother. Your signature is all that's needed. The silence stretched between us, 5,000 miles and a gulf of betrayal that could never be bridged. Will you at least see me? He finally asked. Before I go back? I'll see all of you tonight, I confirmed. 7 o'clock, private dining room. I've prepared something special. Marcus was next, a terse, professional call acknowledging receipt of the evidence and requesting a meeting with his legal team. This puts us in a difficult position, Amber. It put me in a difficult position a year ago, I reminded him. When you fired me without investigation for an incident that was entirely fabricated. The settlement offer arrived by express courier 3 hours later. A substantial sum that acknowledged wrongful termination without technically admitting fault. I signed immediately, having already decided exactly where the money would go. At 7 o'clock, I stood at the entrance to our private dining room as Grace's church group filed in, Scott trailing behind looking shell-shocked. Grace's face was carefully composed, though her eyes darted nervously between her friends who seemed oblivious to the morning's revelations. I welcomed them professionally, introducing our chef who described the evening's special menu. Everything proceeded with perfect Scottish hospitality, until dessert. As the plates were cleared, I stood at the head of the table. In honor of our special relationship, I've prepared something meaningful for each of you. Servers distributed elegant envelopes to each person. Inside was my business card with my new title, Partner Highland Table Restaurant Group, along with a note informing them that in their names, I had donated the entire settlement from Savory Ridge to the Food Allergy Research Foundation. Some jokes, I added quietly, looking directly at Grace, age better than others. The silence was absolute as understanding dawned across their faces. No accusations, no dramatic confrontation, just the elegant symmetry of consequences finally finding their rightful owners. I nodded to the staff to continue service, then walked calmly back to my office, leaving them to digest more than just their desserts. Later that night, after the last of Grace's group had departed in uncomfortable silence, Fiona found me in my office reviewing tomorrow's reservations as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Well, she prompted. How did it feel? I considered the question carefully. Not as vindictive as I'd imagined. Mostly final. Like closing a book I never need to open again. And the husband? Ex-husband soon, I suppose. Scott signed the divorce papers right at the table, I confirmed. First time he's ever made a decision without consulting his mother first. Fiona laughed, raising her glass of whiskey and toast. To new beginnings, then. No, I corrected her gently. To perfect endings. Outside, Edinburgh's evening lights twinkled across the ancient city that had become my true home. A year ago, I'd arrived broken and betrayed, carrying nothing but professional certificates and shattered trust. Now I stood whole, stronger for having been broken, wiser for having been fooled. Grace's little joke had cost me a job, a marriage, and a life I'd thought I wanted. In return, it had given me something far more valuable. The unshakable knowledge of my own resilience, and the sweet, satisfying taste of justice served at precisely the right temperature. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Amber donated the entire settlement to the Food Allergy Research Foundation in Grace's name. The perfect ironic twist after Grace's fake allergic reaction. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. You're just basic. My husband laughed, clinking glasses with his co-workers at his promotion dinner. She was a maid before I married her. Now she organizes my calendar. I smiled, excused myself, and left without a word. 2 hours later, his boss, his brother, and his phone wouldn't stop calling me. Just delete that text, I heard Brandon hiss into his phone as I rounded the corner into our kitchen. He fumbled the device, nearly dropping it into his morning coffee before noticing me. His expression shifted so quickly it was almost comical. From panic to that practiced smile he wore at company functions. Morning, babe. Just work stuff. I smiled back, my face a perfect mask as I handed him his freshly ironed shirt. Your 9 a.m. with the Henderson account was moved to 10:30. I've updated your calendar. What I didn't tell him was that I'd also updated my own hidden calendar, marking another suspicious early morning text with a red flag, the 17th this month. 6 months ago I wouldn't have noticed. 6 months ago I was still the trusting wife who believed her husband when he said he was working late. Then came the text that changed everything. A message from Jennifer that popped up while Brandon was in the shower. Last night was amazing. Can't wait until Katie's visiting her mom next weekend. That text was now preserved, screenshot and encrypted in what I called my insurance policy, a hidden folder buried deep in my cloud storage. The irony wasn't lost on me that Brandon had once laughed at my technologically challenged questions, patiently showing me how to use the very same backup systems I now use to document his betrayal. "You know what, honey?" Brandon said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "You're so good with all this organizing stuff. I don't know what I'd do without my calendar girl." He pecked me on the cheek, the scent of unfamiliar perfume barely detectable beneath his cologne. "Just doing what I do best," I replied, already mentally calculating when I could check the tracking software I'd installed on his phone during one of his deep post-affair slumbers. The same software had already logged 3 visits to the Westlake Hotel in the past month alone. My previous job as a maid at that very hotel had taught me more than how to fold fitted sheets. I'd learned to be invisible, to observe without being observed, to piece together stories from the evidence people carelessly left behind. The hotel manager still greeted me warmly when I accidentally ran into him while shopping. He had no idea that our casual conversations about hotel renovations gave me perfect cover to confirm which room had been booked under Brandon's corporate account on the nights he was working late. In our walk-in closet behind my neatly organized sweaters sat an accordion file labeled Household Receipts. Brandon had never once opened it. Men like him never looked at mundane domestic details. If he had, he would have found meticulous records of his indiscretions. Gas receipts showing mileage inconsistent with his claimed destinations, dinner charges for 2 at restaurants he never mentioned visiting, a strand of long blonde hair, distinctly different from my brown, collected from his suit jacket and preserved in a small envelope. The company Christmas party 3 months ago had been particularly illuminating. While serving as the perfect hostess wife, refreshing drinks and engaging in pleasant small talk, I'd watched Brandon's face drain of color when Kyle's wife arrived with their youngest son Ethan. The boy couldn't have been more than 4, with familiar hazel eyes and a distinctive cleft in his chin, Brandon's cleft. I remembered counting backward, recalling Brandon's business trip to Chicago 5 years ago, how he'd returned distant and drinking more heavily than usual. How Jennifer had taken an extended leave from the company shortly afterward. The dates aligned perfectly. "You okay?" Brandon's brother Xavier had asked me that night, catching me staring at young Ethan. "Just tired," I'd replied, rearranging my features into the pleasant smile expected of an executive's wife. Xavier had given me a strange look, part pity, part guilt, before quickly excusing himself. Another data point for my collection. Xavier knew something. Making friends with Sarah, the lab technician at our local medical center, had been surprisingly easy. We'd met at a charity run sponsored by Brandon's company, and our weekly coffee dates had quickly become a highlight in my carefully constructed routine. She thought nothing of it when I mentioned my interest in genetic testing companies for a fictional article I was writing. "Most people don't realize how easy it is to run these tests," she'd explained over lattes. "You just need a good DNA sample. Hair with follicles attached works best." The next company family picnic had provided the perfect opportunity. Volunteering to help with the children's games had allowed me to offer water bottles to the overheated kids, including Ethan. His discarded bottle, along with Brandon's electric razor clippings, were now sealed and labeled in my growing collection of evidence. Sometimes I wondered if I should confront Brandon directly, throw the evidence in his face and watch his carefully constructed world crumble. But there was a certain power in knowledge unshared, in being underestimated. While Brandon and his colleagues laughed about his basic wife who had risen from maid to glorified secretary, I was building a case that would destroy not just his marriage but his career and reputation. Tonight was Brandon's promotion dinner. Tonight he would introduce me as his supportive wife, the woman behind his success. Little did he know that in my purse sat a USB drive containing every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past 6 months. A digital guillotine waiting to fall. As I applied my makeup, subtle, professional, forgettable, I rehearsed my pleasant smile in the mirror. The smile that had fooled Brandon for months. The smile that hid the calculating mind behind it. "Ready to go, calendar girl?" Brandon called from downstairs. "Almost," I replied, voice steady despite the thunder of my heartbeat. Tonight I would maintain my role as the perfect wife one last time. Tomorrow the world would know exactly who Katie Lawson really was. And Brandon would learn too late that he had married not a basic girl, but a woman who knew how to clean up messes permanently. The restaurant's chandelier light caught in the crystal of my water glass as I sat perfectly poised beside Brandon at the head table. Le Chateau was the most expensive venue in the city. Brandon's choice, naturally. His hand rested possessively on my lower back as he introduced me to executives I'd already met at countless company functions. I smiled and nodded, playing my part flawlessly. "This is my wife, Katie," he said to the CFO's new girlfriend, a willowy blonde who assessed my conservative navy dress with a quick up-down glance. "She keeps the home fires burning while I'm conquering the business world." The woman laughed politely while I maintained my pleasant expression, mentally adding this interaction to my growing list of subtle humiliations. Brandon had long ago stopped seeing me as a partner and started viewing me as an accessory, like his Rolex or his Italian leather briefcase. Kyle, Brandon's boss, stood to offer a toast once everyone was seated. I watched him carefully, noting how his eyes never quite met mine. Did he know his wife and Brandon were involved? Or was he as oblivious as Brandon believed me to be? To Brandon Lawson, Kyle raised his glass. "The newest senior vice president of operations. Your dedication to this company has been nothing short of remarkable." I raised my glass along with everyone else, but my mind was 3 months back at the company picnic watching 4-year-old Ethan running through the sprinklers. Brandon had strategically positioned himself at the grill station all afternoon, creating a bubble of smoke and activity that justified his staying far from the children's play area. I'd calculated the dates in my planner that very night. Brandon's Chicago trip, Jennifer's subsequent leave of absence. Everything aligned perfectly with Ethan's age. "And of course," Kyle continued, "behind every successful man is a supportive woman. To Katie for being Brandon's rock, doormat, calendar girl." I'd heard it all. I sipped my champagne, letting the bitter bubbles match my mood. When dinner arrived, Brandon was already 2 drinks in and growing louder with each toast in his honor. The sales director asked how we'd met and Brandon launched into his favorite anecdote. "She was actually a maid at the Westlake," he said, gesturing toward me with his fork. "Can you believe it? Cleaning rooms by day, taking night classes. I checked in during that Milwaukee account crisis. Remember that disaster, Kyle? And she brought extra towels to my room." He winked at his colleagues. "She was cute and I was stressed." I remembered that night differently. I remembered a kind-eyed man who had seemed genuinely interested in my literature studies, who had asked thoughtful questions and treated me with respect. Where had that man gone? "Now she manages my entire life," Brandon continued, the alcohol loosening his filter. "Appointments, social calendar, even reminds me when it's my mother's birthday." The table laughed appreciatively. "Quite the Cinderella story," Jennifer commented, her smile not reaching her eyes. "More like My Fair Lady," Brandon retorted, getting more laughs. "Had to polish her up a bit, but she cleans up nice, doesn't she?" I felt something hardening inside me like concrete setting. 6 years of marriage, of supporting his dreams while quietly pursuing my organizational psychology degree online, of maintaining his home and reputation while he climbed the corporate ladder. All reduced to a punchline. "You're just basic," Brandon laughed, clinking glasses with his coworkers. "She was a maid before I married her. Now she organizes my calendar." The table erupted in laughter. I glanced up and caught Xavier's eye from across the table. Brandon's brother looked uncomfortable, his gaze dropping to his plate when our eyes met. He knew, had always known, and had said nothing. "Excuse me," I said quietly, placing my napkin beside my barely touched salmon. "I need to freshen up." The cool air of the hallway was a relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the dining room. I leaned against the wall, allowing myself 5 seconds of closed eyes and deep breathing before straightening my spine and heading toward the ladies' room. "Katie, wait." Xavier stood awkwardly by the coat check, his hands thrust into his pockets. We'd always gotten along well, better than he and Brandon did, truthfully. "I'm fine, Xavier," I said, voice steady. Just needed some air. He shouldn't talk about you like that. Xavier stepped closer, lowering his voice. You deserve better. You've always deserved better. I tilted my head, studying him. What exactly are you trying to say? His expression flickered, guilt, concern, and something else. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, I've wanted to tell you for so long. About Brandon and Jennifer. I finished for him. The shock on his face would have been comical under different circumstances. How did you? I'm not as basic as your brother thinks, I replied, reaching into my purse for my compact mirror. I checked my lipstick calmly, watching Xavier's reflection as he processed what I'd said. What are you going to do? He asked finally. I snapped the compact shut. Nothing that isn't long overdue. Xavier seemed about to say more but stopped when he saw my expression. Whatever he read there made him step back slightly. You should return to the party, I suggested. People will wonder where you've gone. After he reluctantly walked away, I entered the restroom and locked myself in a stall. From my purse, I removed my phone and a small notebook marked personal calendar. Inside were dates, times, and codes only I understood. Today's date was circled in red, not for Brandon's promotion, but for what I'd discovered this morning while organizing his tax receipts for our accountant. Hotel bills from the Westlake charged to his personal card rather than the company account. 3 nights last month when he was supposedly at a conference in Denver. The receipt showed room service for 2 champagne and a spa package. The final confirmation had come just hours before we left for tonight's dinner. A bank statement showing regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. An account opened around the time Ethan was born. I pulled out my phone and opened the pre-drafted email I'd prepared weeks ago. Attached were photos, bank statements, hotel receipts, and the DNA test results confirming Brandon's paternity of Kyle's youngest son. My finger hovered over the send button. Once I pressed it, there would be no going back. Brandon's carefully constructed life would implode, and mine would change forever. I thought of his words, just basic, and his laughter mingling with his colleagues. 6 years of my life reduced to a joke. I pressed send, watched the email disappear into cyberspace, then calmly fixed my makeup. I had approximately 90 minutes before the cascade of consequences would begin. Just enough time to leave the restaurant, access my separate bank account, and disappear before Brandon's world collapsed. I smiled at my reflection, a real smile this time. Not basic after all. I walked out of Le Chateau with measured steps, nodding politely to the maitre d' who held the door. Mrs. Lawson, shall I tell your husband you've stepped out for some air? No need, I replied. I'll be back shortly. That was the first lie I'd told all evening. As I slid into the driver's seat of my modest Honda, the practical car Brandon had insisted was more than enough for a wife who only drove to grocery stores and nail salons, I felt an unexpected surge of adrenaline. The night air felt electric against my skin as I pulled away from the valet station. In my rearview mirror, the golden lights of the restaurant grew smaller, like stars disappearing at dawn. I'd memorized this route over the past month, mentally rehearsing each turn and stoplight until I could drive it in my sleep. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the storage facility on the edge of town. The place was deliberately unremarkable, the kind of business people drove past without noticing. I'd chosen it specifically for its anonymity, paying 6 months in advance with cash under my maiden name. The security guard nodded as I swiped my access card. Evening, Ms. Reynolds. Evening, Chuck, I replied, using the friendly but forgettable tone I'd perfected as Brandon's wife. Another skill he'd never appreciated. Unit 247 looked like all the others. A metal door with a simple combination lock. Inside was an ordinary-looking cardboard box labeled college textbooks. Brandon had never questioned why I kept my old organizational psychology textbooks. He'd never asked about my studies at all, really. Inside the box, beneath a layer of actual textbooks, sat my insurance policy, a laptop I'd purchased with cash at a pawn shop, never connected to our home network, and a waterproof case containing thumb drives with multiple backups of all my evidence. I powered up the laptop and connected to the mobile hotspot I'd activated under yet another name. Digital footprints were easy to track if you weren't careful, and I'd been extraordinarily careful. Though I'd already sent the initial email from the restaurant, there were still contingency plans to activate. I logged into the secure email account I'd created months ago, specifically for tonight. In the drafts folder waited 3 additional emails, each scheduled to deploy if certain conditions were met. The first contained the video footage. Brandon had always been paranoid about security, installing an elaborate camera system throughout our home after a neighbor's break-in 3 years ago. What he didn't know was that I'd repositioned 2 of those cameras last year, angling them to capture our living room couch and the entrance to our guest bedroom, Jennifer's favorite locations when she visited during my errands. I clicked on one video file just to confirm it was the right one. The timestamp showed 3 weeks ago while I was supposedly at my book club. There was Brandon leading Jennifer through our front door, his hand already sliding up her blouse. I closed the file quickly, a wave of nausea washing over me despite my mental preparation. The second contingency email contained financial records, proof of the separate account Brandon had set up, regular payments that aligned perfectly with Ethan's birthday, and expenses for gifts I'd never received. A teddy bear purchased the day Ethan was born. A child-sized baseball glove charged to our joint credit card but never brought home. The third contained the DNA results. That had been the trickiest part of my plan, requiring precise timing and a steady nerve. Sarah, my lab technician friend, had unwittingly helped by explaining exactly how genetic testing worked. The science wasn't complicated, it was the collection that required finesse. I'd volunteered to help at the company's annual family picnic 3 months ago, organizing games for the children. No one questioned why the executive's supportive wife would want to hand out water bottles to sweaty kids. No one noticed me carefully collecting Ethan's discarded bottle, preserving the DNA that would ultimately expose his true parentage. I scheduled all 3 emails to send automatically, staggered 30 minutes apart, beginning an hour into Kyle's speech. The timing was crucial. I wanted the revelations to unfold gradually, giving each bombshell time to detonate fully before the next one dropped. With the electronic portion of my plan initialized, I removed one last item from the storage box, a manila envelope containing hard copies of everything. This would go to Brandon's parents tomorrow via courier. They deserved to know what kind of son they'd raised, what kind of brother Xavier had protected. I powered down the laptop and returned everything to its hiding place. The weight I'd carried for 6 months, the suspicion, the evidence gathering, the careful planning, began to lift from my shoulders. Whatever happened next, I had reclaimed my agency. Back in the car, I checked the time. 1 hour had passed since I'd left the restaurant. By now, Brandon would be wondering where I was, perhaps slightly annoyed that I wasn't there to laugh appreciatively at his jokes, to be introduced to important clients as his pretty, basic wife. I drove to a small coffee shop across town. Not one of our usual places, but a quiet spot I discovered during my reconnaissance missions. The barista smiled as I ordered a simple tea. "Rough night?" she asked, noting my formal attire. "Transformative," I replied, selecting a table by the window where I could watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. I turned off my phone completely, removing the battery for good measure. In the sudden silence, I felt my heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. No more alerts. No more careful monitoring of Brandon's movements, no more pretending. The tea was hot and soothing against my throat as I watched darkness creep across the city. In exactly 43 minutes, the first email would reach the entire executive board, Kyle, key clients and Brandon's family members. The video footage would follow 30 minutes later, and finally the DNA results. A strange sense of peace settled over me, unexpected after months of quiet rage. I had done everything in my power to ensure Brandon faced consequences for his actions. Now the universe would take over, each revelation triggering its own cascade of effects that would ultimately dismantle the life he'd built on lies. The coffee shop played soft jazz, the kind Brandon had always dismissed as pretentious background noise. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the melody wash over me. When had I last done something simply because I enjoyed it, not because it fit the image of Brandon's perfect wife? Outside, streetlights flickered on as night descended fully. In another life, the life I'd thought I was building, I would be at Brandon's side right now, smiling proudly as he accepted congratulations for his promotion. In that life, I was still the grateful former maid who had married up, forever indebted to the man who had rescued me. But in this life, my real life, I was the architect of justice. The basic wife who had methodically documented every betrayal. The invisible woman who had finally made herself seen. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 9 o'clock. The storm was coming. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be. Away from the destruction, watching from a distance as my carefully laid plans unfolded with the precision of a perfectly kept calendar. 9 o'clock arrived with the soft chime of the coffee shop's antique clock. I imagined the scene unfolding at Le Chateau, Kyle raising his glass for a final toast to Brandon's brilliant future, executives nodding appreciatively, Brandon basking in his moment of triumph. Then the synchronized ping of email notifications disrupting the polished atmosphere. I didn't need to witness it to know exactly how it would play out. Kyle, ever the professional, would likely check his phone discreetly beneath the table, a habit I'd observed at dozens of company functions. The subject line alone would be enough. Urgent. The truth about Brandon Lawson and your son. At that exact moment in Le Chateau's private dining room, Kyle Harrington's speech faltered mid-sentence. His eyes, fixed on his phone screen beneath the tablecloth, widened perceptibly. The crystal champagne flute in his left hand trembled slightly, sending ripples across the golden liquid. And so with great pleasure I officially welcome Brandon to the... Kyle's voice died as he scrolled through the message, color draining from his face like water down a drain. The assembled guests shifted uncomfortably in the sudden silence. Brandon leaned forward, his practiced smile now strained at the edges. Kyle, he prompted. Everything okay? Kyle looked up slowly, his gaze moving from Brandon to Jennifer, who sat 3 seats away. The look that passed between boss and wife contained volumes. Confusion, dawning comprehension, and finally devastating certainty. Where's Katie? Kyle asked, his voice unnaturally calm. Brandon glanced at the empty chair beside him, irritation flashing across his features. Powdering her nose, I guess. You know women at these things. His laugh died when no one joined in. Jennifer's phone chimed next, followed by a cascade of notification sounds around the table as the email reached each board member simultaneously. She fumbled with her clutch, nearly knocking over her water glass. When she saw the subject line, she made a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat. What the hell is going on? Brandon demanded, looking around the table as his colleagues averted their eyes, some already reading the damning email. Xavier stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I need to make a call, he muttered, already dialing Katie's number as he stumbled toward the exit. Across town, in their tastefully decorated Tudor home, Jennifer's nanny Marissa was settling the children for bed when the house phone rang shrilly. Harrington residence, she answered. Marissa listened carefully. Jennifer's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I need you to pack bags for me and the children. Enough for a week. Use the emergency suitcases in my closet. Mrs. Harrington, is everything all right? Marissa asked, alarmed by the unusual request so late in the evening. Just do it, Jennifer snapped. And have the children ready to leave in 30 minutes. All except. There was a painful pause. All except Ethan. He'll be staying with his father tonight. Marissa's gaze drifted to the hallway where 4-year-old Ethan was brushing his teeth, blissfully unaware that his world was shattering around him. Meanwhile, at the Golden Palm restaurant across town, Eleanor and Richard Lawson were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary when both their phones lit up simultaneously. No work calls on our special night, Eleanor chided her husband as he reached for his device. The boys promised they wouldn't disturb us unless it was an emergency. Richard's face grew increasingly grave as he read the email. Ellie, he said softly, you need to see this. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth as she scrolled through the evidence of her son's betrayal. That poor child, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. And Katie, all this time. Richard's hands clenched into fists. Xavier knew, he said, pointing to a text exchange included in the evidence. He's known for years and said nothing. Protected his brother while that poor girl suffered in silence. Eleanor's shoulders slumped as the weight of the revelation crashed down upon her. We raced them better than this, Richard. What happened to our boys? Richard signaled for the check, their celebration forgotten. I don't know who those men are, Ellie. But they're not the sons we thought we raised. Back at Le Chateau, chaos had fully erupted. Brandon, finally grasping the magnitude of what was happening, longed for Kyle's phone. This is a mistake, he insisted, voice rising as heads turned from nearby tables. Some kind of sick joke. Katie would never. Your wife, Kyle said with deadly calm, has provided video evidence of you and my wife in our home. My home, Lawson. Where my children sleep. Jennifer had retreated to a corner, speaking rapidly into her phone, her free hand gesturing frantically as she issued instructions to the nanny. Board member Diane Thompson was already making calls of her own. We need to convene an emergency meeting. Tonight. This impacts the Henderson merger. They've been copied on the email. Her practiced crisis management tone couldn't fully mask her shock. We need a statement prepared before the morning news cycle. The restaurant manager hovered anxiously at the periphery, sensing the imploding celebration but unsure how to intervene. Brandon's phone buzzed incessantly. Colleagues who had left early, friends who had been copied on the email, his parents trying desperately to reach him. Each vibration represented another pillar of his life crumbling. She can't do this to me, he muttered, repeatedly calling Katie's number only to be sent straight to voicemail. She's nothing without me. Nothing. Xavier returned ashen-faced to find Brandon wild-eyed and desperate. She's not answering, Xavier said. I've tried calling her 10 times. You knew, Brandon accused, rounding on his brother. You knew about Jennifer and said nothing. Like you would have listened, Xavier retorted, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. You never listened to anyone, Brandon. That's why Katie left. You never saw her, never heard her. He was just furniture to you. Convenient, useful furniture. Kyle, who had been reading through the second email, the one containing financial records, looked up with renewed horror. You've been paying child support, he said, voice hollow. For my son. My son. The last words emerged as a broken whisper. Jennifer moved toward him, reaching out a placating hand. Kyle, please, we need to discuss this privately. Don't touch me, Kyle hissed, recoiling from her. Don't ever touch me again. Outside, media vans were already arriving, tipped off by someone inside about the unfolding drama. Flashbulbs illuminated the restaurant's elegant facade, capturing board members as they hurried to their cars, faces grim. By midnight, #Lawson scandal was trending on social media. Anonymous sources from within the company leaked snippets of the story, each version more sensational than the last. The company's stock price began to fluctuate in Asian markets, the first ripples of financial fallout. In the eye of this storm, Brandon stood alone in the now empty private dining room, staring at his phone as it displayed the final email. The DNA results confirming Ethan's paternity, sent to every significant person in his professional and personal life. The evidence was irrefutable. The consequences inescapable. His perfectly constructed life had been balanced on a foundation of lies. Lies he had convinced himself were harmless, necessary even. Now that foundation had been pulled away in one masterful stroke by the woman he had fatally underestimated. The basic wife. The maid. The calendar girl. The architect of his destruction. 3 days passed like a fever dream. I stayed in a quiet hotel on the outskirts of the city, watching the scandal unfold through news alerts and social media. Brandon's name was everywhere. The rising executive caught in a web of lies, the paternity scandal rocking the corporate world, the company's stock tumbling in response. I turned on my phone only once briefly to confirm what I already knew. 67 missed calls from Brandon, 23 from Xavier, and countless text messages ranging from desperate pleas to vicious accusations. I didn't read them. Instead, I forwarded the relevant financial documents to my lawyer, ensuring my separation from Brandon would be as clean as possible. On the third morning, I checked out of the hotel and drove home, unsure what awaited me. The driveway was empty, Brandon's Mercedes conspicuously absent. The house stood quiet and untouched, like a museum dedicated to a life I no longer recognized as mine. Inside, I breathed in the lingering scent of Brandon's cologne, fainter now but still present. Evidence of his hasty departure was everywhere. Drawers left partially open, his favorite watch missing from the dresser, the decanter of bourbon empty on the bar cart. I moved through each room like a ghost, disconnected from the carefully curated furnishings that had once represented our shared success. In the bedroom closet, his clothes still hung in perfect order, color-coded, organized by season and occasion just as I had arranged them. The expensive suits that had helped transform him from ambitious junior executive to senior VP remained, though some were missing. I ran my fingers along the fine fabrics, remembering how proud I'd been to support his rise, how I'd steamed and brushed these very garments before important meetings. The doorbell rang, startling me from my reverie. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to find Kyle Harrington standing on my porch. Not Brandon's boss anymore. Not since the board's emergency meeting had resulted in Brandon's immediate termination, but still an imposing figure in his tailored suit and grave expression. "Katie," he said when I opened the door, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "May I come in?" I led him to the living room, the same room where his wife and my husband had betrayed us both. If Kyle made the connection, he gave no sign, sitting stiffly on the edge of the sofa. "I won't pretend to understand everything that happened," he began, "or why you chose to expose it the way you did. But I respect your courage." I remained silent, waiting. Men like Kyle didn't make personal house calls without purpose. "The company is in turmoil," he continued. "Brandon's actions have damaged our reputation, threatened client relationships, and disrupted operations. We need someone who can restore order." He leaned forward. "Someone with exceptional organizational skills, integrity, and intimate knowledge of our systems." I almost laughed. "You're offering me a job?" "Executive assistant to the new CEO," Kyle clarified. "With a path to operations management within a year if you're interested." "Why would you trust me after what I did?" Kyle's expression hardened momentarily. "Because you told the truth regardless of the cost. That's rare, Katie. And because I've seen your work. The systems you implemented for Brandon, the efficiencies you created." He took credit, but it was you, wasn't it? I nodded slowly. "Besides," Kyle added with a grimace that almost resembled a smile, "I think we both deserve a fresh start." After he left, I stood in the middle of the house that had never truly felt like mine, considering his offer. There was a certain poetic justice in taking a position at the very company where Brandon had risen and fallen. The next visitor arrived as evening shadows stretched across the lawn. Xavier looked terrible, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, shoulders slumped beneath the weight of collective guilt. "Mom and Dad sent me," he said, holding out an envelope. "They wanted you to have this." The letter inside was handwritten on Eleanor's cream stationery, her elegant script flowing across the page with warmth and regret. They expressed their heartbreak over Brandon's actions, their shame at Xavier's complicity, and their admiration for my strength. They hoped, Eleanor wrote, that I might consider maintaining a relationship with them despite everything. They had always wanted a daughter, and in their eyes I would always be family. I folded the letter carefully. "Thank you for bringing this." Xavier stared at his hands. "I should have told you years ago. He's my brother." "And I was your sister-in-law," I replied, not unkindly. "Family loyalty is complicated, Xavier. I understand that better than most." After he left, I spent the evening sorting through Brandon's possessions, separating what he'd want to keep from what could be discarded. The suits, I decided, deserved better than storage or donation to some faceless charity. The next morning, I loaded them into my car and drove to New Beginnings, a program helping former inmates transition back into the workforce. The director's eyes widened at the sight of 15 designer suits, each worth thousands. "These will help men make the right impression at interviews," she explained, running her hand over a charcoal Tom Ford. "First impressions matter so much when you're trying to rebuild your life." "I know," I said, remembering Brandon's critical gaze the first time he saw me out of my maid's uniform. "Sometimes the right armor makes all the difference." 6 months later, I sat behind my executive desk on the 32nd floor, reviewing quarterly projections. The company had weathered the scandal, emerging stronger under new leadership. My promotion to operations director had come 3 months ahead of schedule, my reorganization of key systems saving the company millions in the aftermath of Brandon's departure. My assistant knocked lightly before entering. "Delivery for you, Ms. Reynolds." Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, Brandon's distinctive handwriting immediately recognizable. I had heard through mutual connections that he'd moved to Chicago, accepting a lower-level position at a smaller firm, his reputation permanently tarnished by the scandal. "Katie," the letter began. "I've written this letter 100 times in my head. Nothing seems adequate. I was wrong, about you, about us, about everything that mattered. I didn't see you because I couldn't see past myself. You were never basic. You were extraordinary, and I was too blind to recognize it. I'm sorry." I folded the letter methodically, creasing it with my fingernail before placing it in a folder labeled Closed Accounts in my bottom drawer. No anger, no satisfaction, no regret, just the quiet acknowledgement that this chapter of my life was complete. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, I could see the city stretching toward the horizon, the same view Brandon had coveted for years. But unlike him, I didn't measure my worth by the height of my office or the prestige of my title. My worth had always been there, hidden in plain sight behind the perfect mask he'd labeled basic. And now, rising from the ashes of his betrayal, I was finally, completely, unapologetically myself. The calendar on my desk showed a full schedule. Meetings with department heads, lunch with Kyle's wife, his now ex-wife Jennifer had moved abroad, and drinks later with Eleanor and Richard Lawson, who had become unexpected friends and allies in the aftermath. I was no longer anyone's calendar girl. I was the architect of my own destiny. And there was nothing basic about that. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Katie sent that perfectly timed email during Kyle's speech, watching Brandon's empire of lies collapse from a peaceful coffee shop across town. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Was it the basic wife comment that broke Katie's silence? The DNA test reveal? Or maybe when she donated Brandon's suits to help others rebuild their lives? Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember, sometimes the calendar girl is keeping track of more than just your appointments. On our family trip, my husband sneered, "I booked rooms for me, my ex-girlfriend, and the kids, they're my real love." I smiled sweetly, said nothing, and walked away. Hours passed as I ignored every call. Then something he never expected happened, and it was only the beginning of my silence. "I booked rooms for me, Camille, and the kids." Eric's words hit me like ice water. "Not for you." I stood frozen in the marble lobby of the Grand Ocean View Resort, our luggage scattered around my feet like broken dreams. The tropical paradise I'd researched for months, the family vacation I'd planned down to every detail, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. The sound of crashing waves through the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to mock the silence that followed his announcement. "What?" The word barely escaped my lips, a whisper lost in the resort's ambient music. Eric didn't even look at me. He was too busy checking his phone, that familiar cold indifference painted across his face. "You heard me, Jennifer. 3 rooms. Me, Camille, and 1 for the kids to share." Camille appeared from the gift shop like she'd been choreographing this moment. Her blonde hair cascaded perfectly over her shoulders, her designer sundress fitting her like it was painted on. She walked toward us with the confidence of someone who belonged, while I stood there feeling like an intruder in my own family vacation. "Eric, darling," she purred, sliding her manicured hand along his arm. "Did you tell her about the arrangements?" The lobby suddenly felt suffocating. Families chatted excitedly around us, children giggled as they ran toward the pool, couples held hands while checking in. Everyone looked like they belonged in this picture-perfect scene. Everyone except me. "Mom." Charity's small voice cut through the tension. At 8 years old, she was the youngest, still young enough to sense when something was wrong but not old enough to understand the adult games being played around her. "Where are we sleeping?" Chase, my 14-year-old, shifted uncomfortably beside his little sister. His eyes darted between his father and me, the weight of loyalty pressing down on his teenage shoulders. Jeffrey, at 16, had learned to retreat into his phone during these moments, but I caught him glancing up, watching. "Your mom will figure something out," Eric said dismissively, signing the registration paperwork with theatrical flourishes. "She's resourceful." Camille extended her designer purse toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Be a dear and take this up for me? Room 412. She spoke to me like I was hired help, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. I stared at the purse for a moment that stretched like eternity. Every instinct screamed at me to throw it back at her, to cause a scene, to fight for my dignity in this marble-clad battlefield. That I took it. The leather felt cold against my palms. "Jennifer's always been so helpful," Eric said to Camille, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "She loves taking care of everyone else's needs." The children watched this exchange with growing discomfort. Charity tugged at my dress, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Chase cleared his throat awkwardly. Jeffrey typed faster on his phone, his face reddening. At dinner, the resort's five-star restaurant became my personal hell. The maitre d' had seated us at a prime ocean view table, the kind I'd specifically requested months ago when booking this trip. Camille sat beside Eric, her hand possessively resting on his thigh while she ordered the most expensive items on the menu. "You know what Jennifer is?" Eric announced to our table, his voice carrying that familiar tone he used when he thought he was being clever. "She's like extra luggage. Always there, always taking up space, but you're never quite sure why you brought her along." The words landed like physical blows. Chase choked on his water. Charity looked confused, glancing between her father and me. Jeffrey's fork stopped midway to his mouth. Even nearby diners turned to look, sensing the cruelty in Eric's tone. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, that familiar burn of humiliation that had become too frequent in recent months. The other families around us were laughing, sharing stories, creating memories. We were performing a twisted theater piece where I was the unwilling tragic character. "Dad." Chase started, his voice cracking slightly. "What?" Eric laughed, cutting him off. "It's just a joke. Your mom knows I'm kidding." He looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to play along, to smile and laugh at my own degradation. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I didn't speak. Instead, I placed my napkin on the table with deliberate precision. I stood slowly, feeling every eye at the table follow my movement. The restaurant's ambient chatter seemed to fade as I pushed back my chair. "Where are you going?" Eric's voice carried a note of surprise. He wasn't used to me leaving without explanation, without permission. I looked at him for a long moment, memorizing his face, the way his eyebrows furrowed with confusion, the way Camille's hand tightened possessively on his arm. I looked at my children, their faces reflecting worry and embarrassment and something else. Maybe respect. Then I walked away. My phone started ringing before I even reached the lobby. Eric's name flashed on the screen again and again. I let it ring. In the elevator it rang. Walking down the hallway to my hastily booked room it rang. As I slid the key card and stepped into my sanctuary, it continued its desperate song. I powered it off. Alone in the quiet luxury of my ocean view suite, paid for with my own credit card, I opened my laptop. The familiar glow of the screen illuminated my face as I logged into our financial accounts. The ones Eric assumed he controlled, the ones he'd forgotten were actually in my name. As I scrolled through investment portfolios, business accounts, and property deeds, I realized something profound. Eric had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd pushed me too far, humiliated me too publicly, forgotten too completely who actually held the power in our relationship. My silence tonight wouldn't be weakness. It would be strategy. The laptop screen glowed in the darkness of my hotel room as I began dismantling 12 years of financial entanglement. My fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, each keystroke calculated and deliberate. Eric had always bragged about being the breadwinner, the business mastermind, the financial genius of our household. What he'd conveniently forgotten was that I held the actual keys to the kingdom. I started with the investment portfolio. $73,000 in mutual funds, transferred to my personal account. The real estate holdings came next. Our vacation rental properties in Colorado, the ones Eric loved to mention at dinner parties as his investments, were actually titled under my name for tax purposes. I initiated the paperwork to convert them to my sole ownership. The business accounts proved more complex but not impossible. Eric's consulting firm, the source of his endless ego trips, operated under an LLC I'd established years ago. He'd been so focused on playing the big shot that he'd never bothered to examine the legal documents I'd prepared. Every signature, every filing, every crucial piece of paperwork had been handled by me while he schmoozed clients and took credit. My phone buzzed with another missed call from Eric. 27 attempts since dinner. I glanced at the screen and powered it off completely. At 11:47 p.m., I dialed my attorney's emergency line. Margaret Chin had been our family lawyer for years, but tonight she was solely mine. "Jennifer? What's happening?" "It's nearly midnight." "Margaret, I need to file for legal separation. Tonight. Can you start the paperwork?" Her voice sharpened with professional focus. "Tell me everything." I recounted the evening's humiliation, the calculated cruelty, the way Eric had paraded his affair partner like a trophy while reducing me to hired help. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes. We'll need documentation of financial assets, evidence of emotional abuse, and a comprehensive separation agreement, she said. How quickly do you want to move? Immediately. I want him served before he realizes what's happening. Jennifer, this is a significant step. Are you certain? I looked around the hotel room I'd booked with my own credit card, thought about the purse I'd carried like a servant, remembered the laughter at my expense. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Margaret's fingers clicked across her keyboard. I'll have preliminary documents ready by morning. We'll start with asset protection, then move to formal separation proceedings. While Margaret worked through the night, I continued my methodical financial restructuring. The joint credit cards were canceled one by one. The automatic payments Eric relied on for everything from his gym membership to his expensive car lease were redirected to accounts he couldn't access. By 3 a.m., I'd effectively frozen him out of the financial empire I'd built while he played pretend Sue. Dawn crept through the hotel curtains as I packed my belongings. My phone, now equipped with a new number, remained blissfully silent. No desperate calls from Eric. No manipulative text messages. No attempts to gaslight me back into submission. The resort lobby buzzed with checkout activity. Families dragged rolling suitcases toward the entrance. Children complained about leaving paradise. Couples discussed their flights home. I positioned myself strategically near the front desk, close enough to observe but far enough to remain unnoticed. Eric appeared first, his hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he'd spent the night pacing and calling. Camille followed, her previous confidence replaced by irritated confusion. The children trailed behind, their faces reflecting the tension they'd absorbed overnight. Sir, I'm sorry, but your card has been declined, the desk clerk said, her voice professionally apologetic. Eric's face flushed crimson. That's impossible. Try it again. The clerk swiped the card a second time, then a third. Each attempt produced the same result. Declined. Insufficient funds. Perhaps you have another card? She suggested gently. Camille stepped forward, her designer purse clutched defensively. Use mine, she whispered, but her voice carried across the marble lobby. Eric's humiliation deepened as Camille's card also failed to cover the substantial resort bill. 3 rooms for 4 nights, plus meals, spa treatments and room service charges. I'd witnessed them accumulating. There must be some mistake, Eric insisted, his voice rising. Other guests began to stare. I'm a successful businessman. This is impossible. The desk clerk maintained her professional composure while security subtly positioned themselves nearby. Sir, would you like to contact your bank? I watched from my position near the gift shop as Eric fumbled with his phone, dialing frantically. His conversation with the bank was brief and clearly devastating. His face went ashen as he listened to explanations he couldn't comprehend. The children stood together, embarrassed by their father's public meltdown. Chase put a protective arm around Charity, while Jeffrey studied his shoes intently. Mom paid the bill last night, I heard Jeffrey tell his siblings quietly. I saw her at the desk. I had indeed paid the full bill, with my personal credit card, the one Eric had never bothered to learn existed. $23,000 for a family vacation that had cost me far more than money. As Eric continued his humiliating negotiation with hotel management, I wheeled my luggage toward the taxi stand. The morning sun felt warm on my face. The ocean breeze carried promises of freedom I hadn't felt in years. My new phone contained Margaret's message. Separation papers filed. Service scheduled for this afternoon at his office. I climbed into the taxi without looking back, leaving Eric to discover that the woman he'd treated as extra luggage had been carrying far more weight than he'd ever imagined. By the time he thought to look for me, Jennifer Morrison would no longer exist in his world. The silence I'd chosen the night before had become something far more powerful than words ever could be. 3 days after returning to my temporary apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with 3 blank envelopes and a heart heavy with love that had nowhere to go. The silence I'd maintained felt necessary, but my children deserved more than abandonment. They deserved to understand the mother who had disappeared from their lives. I started with Charity's letter first, my 8-year-old who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. My handwriting trembled as I wrote about the morning she'd broken her arm falling from her bike. How I'd held her in the emergency room for 6 hours, singing "You Are My Sunshine," until the pain medication finally let her sleep. I reminded her of the purple cast we'd decorated together with butterfly stickers, how she'd insisted on wearing it like a badge of honor. Carefully, I slipped her old drawing into the envelope, the one she'd made for Mother's Day 2 years ago. Stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with best ever written in wobbly crayon letters. I'd kept it pressed between the pages of my Bible, one of dozens of treasures Eric had dismissed as clutter. Chase's letter required different words. At 14 he was caught between childhood and becoming a man, desperately seeking his father's approval while still needing his mother's guidance. I wrote about the night he'd failed his first algebra test, how we'd sat at this same kitchen table until 2 a.m., working through problems until mathematics finally clicked. I reminded him of his first football game, when he'd scored the winning touchdown and searched the bleachers until he found my face, needing that moment of shared triumph. Into his envelope went his 8th grade report card, the one I'd laminated because I was so proud of his straight A's. Eric had barely glanced at it, too busy with a client call to notice his son's academic breakthrough. Jeffrey's letter proved the most challenging. At 16 he was already building walls, preparing for the independence that loomed ahead. But I remembered the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd practiced his pitching motion in our backyard for hours while I caught every throw. I wrote about his first broken heart, when Melissa Harper had chosen someone else for the school dance. How he'd cried on my shoulder while I made his favorite chocolate chip cookies and promised him that someday a girl would see what an amazing young man he was becoming. His baseball glove went into the envelope, the one from Little League that he'd outgrown but couldn't bear to throw away. I'd found it in his closet during one of my secret visits to pack more belongings, tucked behind his trophies like a shrine to simpler times. I drove to their school and hand-delivered each letter to the main office, asking Mrs. Henderson, the secretary who'd known our family for years, to ensure they reached my children personally. "Jennifer, honey," she said, her eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right? The kids have been asking about you." "They'll understand soon," I whispered, my voice barely holding together. Within days, the carefully constructed harmony Eric and Camille had tried to create began cracking. Chase called me from his friend's phone. Eric had confiscated his cell after finding my letter. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he sobbed into the phone. "I didn't know. I didn't understand what you did for us. You were children, sweetheart. You weren't supposed to understand. That was my job." Through Chase I learned about the chaos erupting at home. Camille had moved in completely, rearranging furniture, throwing away family photos, trying to erase my presence while establishing her own dominance. But children don't forget so easily. Jeffrey had found more of my hidden treasures during his search for clean clothes. A journal I'd kept documenting each of their milestones, photos from every birthday party I'd planned, certificates I'd earned from parenting classes I'd taken to be better for them. Each discovery revealed layers of maternal devotion they'd taken for granted. "She doesn't listen to us like you did," Chase whispered during another stolen phone call. "When Charity has nightmares, Camille just tells her to grow up. When Jeffrey talks about college, she changes the subject. She talks at us, not to us." The house that had once been filled with my quiet presence, packed lunches appearing like magic, homework help offered without request, scraped knees kissed better, now echoed with tension. Camille's shrill voice replaced my gentle guidance. Her impatience replaced my endless reserves of maternal energy. "Dad keeps bragging about how much simpler everything is now," Jeffrey told me during a brief encounter at the grocery store. "But nothing works anymore. There's no food in the house because nobody planned meals. My baseball uniform wasn't clean for yesterday's game. Charity cried for an hour because she couldn't find her favorite stuffed animal. The stuffed animal was in my apartment. I'd grabbed it during one of my packing trips, knowing she'd need its comfort. "Mom," Jeffrey's voice cracked slightly. "Can you come back? Just for Charity? She asks for you every night." My heart shattered and mended simultaneously. They were beginning to see what Eric had systematically tried to make invisible. The countless ways I'd held their world together through love, attention, and sacrifice. The breaking point came during Chase's championship basketball game. I watched from the parking lot as Eric and Camille arrived late, too busy arguing to notice Chase scanning the bleachers for familiar faces. When he made the winning shot, his eyes found the empty space where I used to sit, where I'd cheered at every game for 3 seasons. That night, Charity's small voice cut through the darkness of their disrupted home. "I want Mama, Jennifer." Even through Chase's whispered phone call, I could hear the profound silence that followed. Eric had no response. Camille offered no comfort. In that moment, my absence spoke louder than any argument I could have made. My children were finally seeing the mother they'd forgotten, not through my presence, but through the devastating emptiness left behind. The process server found Eric at his favorite coffee shop, the upscale place where he held his Tuesday morning power meetings. I'd told Margaret exactly where he'd be, same table, same time every week for the past 3 years. His predictability had always annoyed me, now it served my purposes perfectly. Eric Morrison? The young man in the cheap suit approached his table where Eric sat across from a potential client, his laptop open, projecting success like a peacock displaying its feathers. Yes. Eric's voice carried that familiar tone of superiority, assuming this interruption was someone seeking his business expertise. You've been served. The manila envelope landed on Eric's laptop keyboard with a soft thud that somehow echoed through the bustling cafe. His client, a nervous-looking woman clutching a business proposal, watched with growing alarm as Eric's face drained of color. Margaret's legal documents were thorough and devastating. Asset freeze. Business dissolution. Legal separation. Every financial account tied to my name, which was nearly everything, had been systematically locked away from his access. The consulting firm he'd bragged about building was revealed for what it truly was. A shell company operating under my credentials, my connections, my credit history. This can't be legal, Eric whispered to himself, scanning the pages with growing horror. His client gathered her papers and left without a word, sensing the professional meeting had taken a decidedly personal turn. Within hours, Eric discovered the true scope of his powerlessness. His business credit cards were declined at lunch. His corporate gym membership had been suspended for non-payment. The leased BMW he drove like a status symbol was scheduled for repossession. I'd been making those payments from my personal account for 18 months. Camille arrived at his office that afternoon in a panic, her designer heels clicking frantically across the marble floor of the building I'd helped him lease. Eric, what is happening? She demanded, waving her phone. My credit card was declined at Nordstrom. The bank says there's been suspicious activity on our joint account. Our joint account? Eric's laugh held no humor. Camille, we don't have a joint account. We never did. I watched this unfold through Jeffrey, who'd been present when Camille tore through Eric's home office like a woman possessed. She discovered what I'd always known but never flaunted. Every deed, every contract, every significant asset bore my name as the primary owner. Eric had been living in a house I'd purchased, driving cars I'd financed, running a business built on credit I'd established. She made me look like an idiot, Eric raged to his brother over the phone, unaware that Jeffrey was listening from the hallway. Everything I thought I owned, everything I built, it's all hers. But the financial devastation was only the beginning of Eric's unraveling. The children, emboldened by my letters and increasingly resentful of Camille's presence, began their own archaeological dig through family history. Chase found a box of photo albums in the basement, buried behind Christmas decorations that hadn't been touched since I'd disappeared. Every page told the same story. Me at his soccer games, me helping with science fair projects, me holding him in the hospital when he'd had his appendix removed at age 10. Eric appeared sporadically, usually in the background, often looking at his phone. Look at this. Chase showed Jeffrey a picture from his 13th birthday party. I was kneeling beside him as he blew out candles, my face radiant with maternal pride. Eric stood apart, checking his watch, already eager to end the celebration. Charity discovered her baby book, meticulously maintained with my careful handwriting documenting every milestone. First smile, first word, first steps, all recorded with the devotion of a mother who treasured each moment. Eric's contributions were sparse. A few signatures on school forms, birthday cards with generic messages. Daddy never came to my dance recitals, Charity announced to Camille one evening, her 8-year-old honesty cutting through the adult pretenses. But Mama Jennifer came to every single one. She even helped make my costumes. Camille's attempts to dismiss these revelations only highlighted her inadequacy. Well, your father was working hard to provide for you, she'd say, but the children had seen the truth preserved in photographs and memories. Eric's phone calls to me became increasingly desperate. My new number remained unknown to him, but he tried every mutual friend, every family member, even my former colleagues. Each attempt met the same response. They hadn't heard from me, didn't know where I was, couldn't help him reach me. She won't talk to me, he complained to his mother during one of his increasingly frequent visits. How am I supposed to fix this if she won't even listen? But I was listening. To everything. Through my children's whispered phone calls, through Margaret's updates on his frantic legal maneuvers, through mutual friends who reported his growing desperation. My silence had become a weapon more powerful than any argument I could have made. The man who'd reduced me to extra luggage was discovering that he'd been living in luggage I'd packed, traveling on tickets I'd purchased, staying in hotels I'd booked. Every aspect of the life he'd taken credit for had been carefully constructed and maintained by the woman he'd dismissed as irrelevant. Late at night, Eric would sit in the house that was legally mine, surrounded by children who increasingly questioned his version of family history, living with a woman who'd discovered that his promises of financial security were built on foundations he'd never actually owned. My silence reflected back to him the truth he'd spent years avoiding. Without me, Eric Morrison was nothing more than an elaborate fiction, a character playing a role in a story someone else had written. And now the author had stopped writing his lines. Jeffrey appeared at my apartment door on a Thursday evening, his 16-year-old frame filling the doorway but his eyes holding the vulnerability of a much younger boy. Rain dripped from his hair and I realized he'd walked the 3 miles from his father's house in the storm. Mom. His voice cracked on the single word and I saw years of suppressed emotion threatening to spill over. I opened the door wider and he collapsed into my arms like he used to when he was small and the world felt too big to handle alone. His shoulders shook as 16 years of confusion and loyalty finally found their breaking point. Why didn't you ever tell me? He sobbed into my shoulder. Why didn't you tell me what you gave up for us? What Dad really was? I guided him to my small living room, this modest space that had become my sanctuary. He sat on my second-hand couch, looking lost and angry and heartbroken all at once. You were a child, Jeffrey. I just wanted you to feel loved. I wanted you to have a father you could respect even if... I paused, choosing my words carefully. Even if that meant protecting you from difficult truths. But I hurt you, he whispered. All those times I chose him over you, all those times I didn't defend you. I was such a terrible son. No. My voice was firm. You were exactly the son I raised you to be. Loyal, loving, trusting. Those are beautiful qualities, sweetheart. Don't let his failures make you question your own heart. Jeffrey pulled something from his backpack. A worn composition notebook I recognized immediately. One of my journals from 3 years ago, filled with my private thoughts during some of our family's most challenging times. Chase found this in a storage box Dad forgot about, he said, his fingers tracing the cover. Mom, I read about the night I broke my wrist at baseball practice. You wrote about sitting in the emergency room for 6 hours holding my hand while I cried. You wrote about calling in sick to work the next day to take care of me, even though you couldn't afford to miss those hours. I remembered that night vividly. Eric had been at a business dinner, too important to interrupt for his injured son. I'd handled everything alone as usual. You wrote about giving up the promotion at your job because it would have meant traveling, and you couldn't bear to be away from us more than you already were for Dad's career, Jeffrey continued, his voice breaking. You wrote about selling your grandmother's ring to pay for Chase's football equipment when Dad said the budget was too tight. The ring had been my most treasured possession, a Victorian emerald that had been in my family for 4 generations. I'd never told anyone about selling it, had simply claimed I'd put it somewhere safe when Eric asked about it months later. I wrote those things down because I needed to remember why I was making those choices, I said softly. Not because I wanted recognition, but because sometimes the sacrifices felt so big that I needed to remind myself they were worth it. Jeffrey looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. He told us you were weak, that you needed us to take care of you. But it was the opposite, wasn't it? You were taking care of all of us, even him. Before I could respond, my doorbell rang. Chase stood in the hallway, soaked and shivering, with Charity's small hand clutched in his. My youngest daughter's face was streaked with tears, her favorite stuffed animal, the one I'd rescued from their house, pressed against her chest. We walked, Chase said simply. Charity wanted her birthday with you. I had forgotten. In the chaos of separation and legal proceedings, I'd lost track of the date. Today was Charity's 9th birthday, and somehow my children had found their way to me. Camille planned a party, Charity whispered, her small voice barely audible. But she invited her friends, not mine. She bought a cake with flowers, but I hate flowers on cake. She got me a dress that's too big and the wrong color. Everything was wrong, Mama. I knelt to her level, my heart breaking at the defeat in her young eyes. Oh, baby girl. I told them I wanted you, she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. I said it was my birthday and I get to choose, and I choose you. Dad got mad and Camille said I was being ungrateful, but Chase said we could come find you. So we left, Chase added, his 14-year-old voice trying to sound braver than he felt. We just walked out. Let them try to stop us. I looked at my 3 children, drenched and defiant, and felt something shift in my chest. They had chosen me. Not because I'd asked them to, not because I'd manipulated or pleaded, but because they finally saw the truth of what our family had really been. Are you going to make us go back? Jeffrey asked, his question holding years of fear. Never again, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. Not unless you want to. Charity launched herself into my arms, her small body fitting perfectly against mine like she'd never left. Chase followed, then Jeffrey, and suddenly we were a tangle of arms and tears and relief in my tiny living room. I'm sorry, Mama, Charity whispered against my neck. I'm sorry I forgot how much you love us. You didn't forget, sweetheart. You were just confused for a while. That's not your fault. We're not going back, Chase said, his voice stronger now. We want to stay with you. All of us. I held my children close, feeling their heartbeats against mine, and realized that my silence had accomplished something no argument ever could have. It had given them space to see clearly, to choose freely, to come home to the love that had never wavered. My silence hadn't been punishment or manipulation. It had been protection. Protection for them to discover their own truth, and protection for me to preserve what remained of my heart. Now, with my children choosing to return to me, that heart felt whole again. The eviction notice arrived at Eric's door on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 3 months after my children had walked through the rain to choose their truth. I learned about it from Margaret, who'd been monitoring the legal proceedings with professional satisfaction. He's lost the house, she informed me over coffee, her voice carrying no triumph, only factual completion. The mortgage payments stopped when you froze the accounts. He couldn't prove ownership because, well, he never actually owned it. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into patterns that dissolved as quickly as they formed. And Camille? Gone. Disappeared the moment his credit card started getting declined. Apparently, she'd been job hunting since the resort incident. Found herself a pharmaceutical sales manager in Phoenix. Left while Eric was at his brother's house begging for a loan. The house that had been our family home for 8 years now sat empty, its windows reflecting nothing but sky. Eric had been forced to move into a studio apartment across town, the kind of place college students rented when their parents stopped sending money. His BMW had been repossessed, replaced by a 10-year-old Honda with a dented bumper and a temperamental engine. Meanwhile, my children and I had created something entirely different. I'd purchased a small 3-bedroom ranch house in the next school district, close enough for the kids to maintain their friendships but far enough to establish our new beginning. It wasn't grand or impressive, just honest wood floors, clean white walls, and windows that let in morning light without pretense. Mom, can we paint my room purple? Charity had asked on our first day, her 9-year-old eyes bright with possibility. Any color you want, sweetheart. We painted together that weekend, all 4 of us. Purple walls with silver stars that we applied one by one while music played from Jeffrey's phone. Chase accidentally got paint in his hair and we laughed until our stomachs hurt. Simple moments that felt revolutionary after years of walking on eggshells around Eric's moods. The boys shared the larger bedroom not because we couldn't afford better, but because they'd chosen to. We've got catching up to do, Jeffrey had explained. 16 years of real conversations. I converted the garage into my home office, where I rebuilt my consulting practice using the business connections Eric had never realized were originally mine. Clients who'd respected my work but dealt with Eric because of his aggressive self-promotion now called me directly. My phone rang constantly with opportunities I'd forgotten existed. Jennifer, we've been hoping you'd go independent, said David Chin, a former client who'd always made Eric nervous with his pointed questions. Your husband's presentations were flashy, but we knew the real expertise came from you. 6 months passed before I composed Eric's final communication. It wasn't a letter exactly, but an accounting. A meticulous breakdown of every financial transaction I'd made on his behalf over 12 years of marriage. The document ran 37 pages, each entry carefully documented with dates, amounts, and purposes. $847,000 in mortgage payments for a house titled in my name. $124,000 in car payments for vehicles he'd driven like status symbols. $67,000 in credit card debt accumulated for his business lunches, golf memberships, and clothing designed to project success he'd never actually achieved. $43,000 in legal fees for business incorporations, patent applications, and contract negotiations he'd claimed as his victories. The numbers told a story Eric had never allowed himself to see. The story of a woman who'd sacrificed her own ambitions to build a platform for his ego, who'd worked tirelessly behind the scenes while he performed for audiences who were really applauding her efforts. But the financial accounting was only the beginning. I'd also included non-monetary contributions, 2,190 hours of unpaid administrative work for his consulting firm, 847 client dinners where I'd played the charming wife while actually steering crucial business conversations, 156 parent-teacher conferences attended alone because his schedule was always more important. The final page contained only 2 sentences. My silence was never weakness. It was protection from you. I mailed the envelope on a Thursday, using certified delivery to his cramped apartment. According to the tracking information, he'd signed for it himself at 2:47 p.m. on Friday afternoon. He never responded. That weekend, while my children and I planted a vegetable garden in our backyard, Eric sat in his empty studio apartment reading and rereading the documentation of his hollow existence. Jeffrey later told me that his father had called him, voice shaking, trying to explain or justify or somehow minimize what the numbers revealed. He kept saying you were being vindictive, Jeffrey reported during one of our evening walks around the neighborhood. But I read those papers, Mom. You weren't being mean. You were just being honest. Honesty can feel cruel to people who've been living in fantasy, I replied, watching Charity chase fireflies in our front yard. By December, Eric had stopped trying to contact us altogether. His weekly attempts to arrange visits with the children had dwindled to monthly, then disappeared entirely. The man who'd once demanded center stage in every family drama had finally learned the power of silence, not by choice but by consequence. On Christmas morning, as my children opened presents in our modest living room, Eric woke up alone in his studio apartment to the sound of upstairs neighbors arguing. The silence he'd once imposed on me had become his permanent companion, echoing through rooms that held no laughter, no warmth, no evidence that love had ever existed within those walls. I watched my daughter carefully arrange her new art supplies, my son's debate strategy for the board game they'd unwrapped, and realized that silence, wielded with purpose, had given us everything we'd never known we were missing. Eric's world had shrunk to the size of his understanding, small, empty, and profoundly quiet. Ours had expanded beyond measure. If this story of silent revenge had you hooked, hit that like button. My favorite part was when Jennifer quietly dismantled Eric's entire world from her hotel room while he thought she was just extra luggage. What was your favorite moment? The declined credit card? The kids choosing her? That final envelope of truth? Drop it in the comments below and subscribe for more stories.